On behalf of the NGO CSW Committee, I would like to welcome everyone to the special Asia Pacific Consultation Day of CSW 65 being held virtually for the first time. I am Suvechya Rana from Nepal, Youth Rep of the Asia Pacific CSW Committee and also the MC of the event. NGO CSW Asia Pacific is committed to ensuring that everyone has a fulfilling experience with the NGO CSW 65 virtual forum. Our goal is to make this platform as inclusive and productive as possible through a shared leadership model under the principles to follow a safe environment founded in respect and inclusivity. We do not accept any online harassment or hostile behavior. Anyone who does not follow these principles will be evicted, reported, and blocked from this forum. At the start of the program, may I call on Carol Shaw, co-chair of the Asia NGO CSW Committee, for introduction and acknowledgement of the opening poem. Floor is yours, Carol.
Thank you. Thank you, Suvechya. I am based in Australia, and so today I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which we are virtually meeting today. I'm in Sydney, so I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And we recognize their connection and continuity to land, waters, culture, and the spaces in between. We pay our respects to our elders past and present and emerging. In Australia, sovereignty has never been ceded. It always is and always will be Aboriginal land. In this forum, I would also like to acknowledge the generations of women, past, present, on whose shoulders we stand, and those who have paved the way so that others may be walking a smoother path. To start this today, I would like to share with you a poem that speaks to me and hopefully will speak to you and will be an opening section. It is by, it's a poem by Alice Ether, an Indigenous woman, and it's called Yuya Karabura. Now, if you please just hold one moment while I pull it up onto the screen.
I'm standing by this fire, the embers smoking, the ashes glowing, the coals weighing us down. The youth are buried in the rubble. My eyes are burning, and through my nostrils, the smoke is stirring. I breathe it in. Yuya Garabura. I wear a ship on my wrist that shows my blood comes from convicts. On the second fleet, my father's forefathers came, whipped, beaten, and bound in chains. The dark tone in my skin, the brown in my eyes, sunset to sunrise, my Wunnal mother's side, my Gika, who grew up in a dugout canoe. In her womb is where my consciousness grew. Yuya Garabura. I walk between these two worlds, a split life, split skin, split tongue, split kin. Every day these worlds collide and I'm living and breathing this story of black and white. Sitting in the middle of this collision, my mission is to bring two divided worlds to sit beside this fire and listen. Through this skin, I know where I belong. It is both my center and my division. Yuya Garabura. My ancestors dance in the stars and their tongues are in the flames. And they tell me, you have to keep the fire alive between the black and the white. There's a story waiting to be spoken. In every life, there's a spirit waiting to be woken. Now I'm looking at you with the stars in my eyes and my tongue is burning flames. And I say, Yuya Garabura. The sacred songs are still being sung, but the words are slowly fading. The distant cries I'm hearing are the mothers burying their babies. The elders are standing strong, but the ground beneath them is breaking. Yuya Garabura. Now I welcome you to sit beside my fire. I'm allowing you to digest my confusion. I will not point my finger and blame, because when we start blaming each other, we make no room for changing each other. We've got to keep this fire burning, with ash on our feet and coal in our hands. Teach Moderator, them young ones, how to live side by side. Because tomorrow, when the sun rises and our fires have gone quiet, they will be the ones to reignite it. Yuya, Garabura, these flames, us, will be their guidance.
After this powerful poem, we'll call upon Vandana Rana, co-chair of the Asia Pacific NGO CSW committee and member of the CEDAW committee, to set the context for the event.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Suvechya, and a warm greetings to everyone, particularly from Asia, but also from around the world, who has joined this Asia Pacific NGO CSW 65 Consultation Day. Indeed, as the poem said, we have to get the torch burning, as well as the fire aflame, fire of equality of flame. I think that is what we need to do, and that's how we are all together today to keep that aflame. You know, the priority theme of the CSW 65, as we all know, is women in decision making, particularly in public life, and the elimination of violence against women. And this, with this, I recall the Beijing conference 26 years ago, where I, and I'm sure a number of you, had also the opportunity to attend, and the fire of activism actually grew from that strong, powerful movement of women's equality, women's rights and activism. And and of course, we all know, out of the 12 critical areas of concern, women's place in decision-making and violence against women were two of the 12 critical areas of concern as well. And it was after the Beijing conference in the Asia Pacific region that we have documented significant progress in a number of areas, particularly if you talk about in the legislative area related to violence against women, laws and policies on gender equality. Government mechanisms have been set up in Nepal, the Women's Conference, the Women's Ministry, as well as gender focal points were set up after that. Technological exchange and also activism from the civil society has grown immensely after the Beijing conference. Maternal mortality, gender gaps in education also has declined significantly. But we are very, very far from achieving equality. We fall short on that. And I think at the rate that we are moving ahead, it will be more than 150 years before we actually achieve equality. So there's a need to intensify 10 men in decision-making positions. But in Asia, it is 1 woman to 4 men that are in the decision-making positions. So we lag far behind this level of inequality that remains high, particularly in unpaid care work. In Asia, even in my country, in most South Asian countries, the unpaid care work is one of the reasons that has been promoting inequality and women's recognition of work as well. We need to implement national as well as international norms and commitments. And here I come to CEDAW as one of the most powerful Bill of Rights of women and a very legally binding framework that strengthens the accountability of states, and particularly in terms of women's participation. It's Article 4 on temporary special measures that the CEDAW committee urges all member states consistently to adopt and increase women's participation and decision-making. And the civil society have taken the recommendations given by the committee to member states to strengthen their advocacy and bring about that significant change that reflects women in decision-making table. But one of the biggest challenge, even as a CEDAW committee member, as an activist of 3 decades myself, I have felt is the negative gender social norms, the mindset, the stereotype, the stigma, and the lack of political will who are in decision-making, predominantly male, that refuse to change this. We have, I think, quite adequate policies, we have mechanisms, but the implementation is so obstructed by this kind of mindset. And that is where we need to tackle in the coming years. And that is where I see the great role of youth as change agents. We need to invest in passing on our experiences to the youth, build them as models, and see how we can work with them. And it is very significant that we are having generation equality, intergenerational dialogues, which is very significant in Mexico, the end of this month, and then in France as well. That is where this intergeneration dialogue will take place. And in the Asia Pacific, I know many countries, including in Nepal, we have already started our youth engagement and intergenerational dialogues on issues related to gender equality. So the panel discussion that is taking place now will discuss some of these priorities, some of the challenges that the Asia Pacific region is facing, and what we can do together. We have panelists from Myanmar. Conflict is another very, very big challenging issue. And I'm so happy, thank you for the representative from Myanmar who is here, in spite of the very, very difficult situation in the country. We have Malaysia, Singapore, we have Nepal, Fiji, and of course, we have UN Women Regional Office, Melisa, as a panel discussion over here, in the panel discussion. So together, I think we will be able to achieve the equality that benefits all, men as well as women. We can do it, we will do it, we must do it. Power to women's movement, more power to women's movement and equality movement. Thank you so much. Thank you.
The technical glitch. I would now like to hand over the floor to Humaira Sharifi from Afghanistan, Youth Rep of the NGO CSW Committee, to introduce the moderator and panelist for the panel discussion on future of feminism and feminist leadership.
Okay. Thank you. It's Humaira Sharifi, Youth Representative at the Asia Pacific NGO CSW based in Afghanistan. So I'm going to introduce the panelists as well as a moderator for this webinar today. So I'm going to start with Melisa Alvarado. She is the Ending Violence Against Women Regional Program Manager at UN Women, Asian Pacific Regional Office. Melisa has been working specifically on ending violence against women and children for 20 years through program management in design, policy and legislation, development and implementation, developing interagency response system, technical assistance, capacity building, advocacy and research. Prior to joining the Asian Pacific office, Melisa managed UN Women's Ending Violence Against Women portfolio in the Pacific Islands, provided dedicated technical assistance to the UN. Our second panelist is League of Burma. Ms. Hser is now Women's League of Burma General Secretary. She worked with Karen Women Organization for 10 years. She has attended many workshops, training and exchange programs in Bangkok, Vice Chairperson in Youth Conference Committee, technical support.
Suvechya. Hello everyone, my name is Isha Tembe. I am one of the Youth Committee members for Asia Pacific NGO CSW, and I will be the moderator for the panel discussion today. As we engage with some really great speakers on the subject of women's access to leadership and the future of feminist leadership in the region. It's a particularly great day to be hosting such a discussion today, as right now around Australia, we have women coming together and participating in the March for Justice, demanding the end to misogyny, violence and abuse that too many women face in their day-to-day lives. So to be here today and having these important discussions is really quite fitting as we show our solidarity towards pursuing and achieving gender equality. So I thank you all for choosing to be with us here today. So for this session, we have 6 speakers, and I'll ask each speaker to present on the topic of women's leadership and the future of feminist leadership. They will then have 10 minutes to respond, and I will then finish the session if there's enough time on a closing question. So I turn to our first speaker today, and I'd like to warmly welcome Melisa Alvarado. Melisa has a wealth of experience working in advocacy with a particular focus on gender equality and ending violence against women and children. Working with the Regional Office of UN Women in Thailand, you would be able to gauge an understanding of the impact that events such as COVID-19 has had on the region and how that has created challenges and developments for women in leadership positions. From this experience, what has been some of the key challenges and how do you think this will shape the future of feminist leadership?
Thank you so much, Isha, and all of the organizers for inviting me to be part of it. It really is a pleasure to be here in solidarity with everyone on the panel today. So I'm going to share my screen and walk through a few observations that we've been making related to women leadership and COVID-19. I hope that you can see my screen well and that you can hear me. If you can't, please just shout out. And so what I will cover today in the next 10 minutes is really just a really quick snapshot of some of the observations we've been making related to women leadership and COVID. And I'll also be touching a little bit on violence against women, since that is my specialty and I really can't help but talk about it. And so, I mean, the first thing that I think is really noticeable, and all of us have been, living this really, is the gendered impacts of COVID-19 on women in particular. We have now quite robust data which affirms that the gender equality indicators have really been worsening since COVID-19 emerged. I think all of you know that violence against women has increased related to the lockdowns, related to tensions in families and in relationships, related to economic hardships. And this is really just, having a very broad effect on women and our ability to be influential, to be present, to be solution building and innovating, right? So this is really pulling back women's ability to be in front in some ways, though, of course, not in all ways. And we also, of course, recognize that the increased economic security and hardship for women has been astounding. And the industries where women are usually really highly represented have experienced such intense job losses, such as in retail, hospitality, textile, and tourism. And women in informal employment, of course, in domestic workers, daily wage workers, have really been left in extreme hardship without, in many cases, a solid safety net to fall back on. And this has really been connected to experiences of discrimination, vulnerability, xenophobia in many contexts. And so we're really looking at a very, very dire situation, which really, calls upon all of us to be able to make sure that our responses for women are increasingly inclusive and diverse. And I think that that's a theme that we're all really amplifying right now. We also appreciate, as even Suvechya Rana said, that women have shouldered the increased burden of unpaid care work. And there's very noticeable differences, gender differences in how families are picking up those additional burdens, and it's usually falling on women. So I'm going to give a slide with a little bit of data about that now. And so UN Women has done some rapid assessments related to what are the roles that women are playing in this COVID pandemic and what's happening in families. And here we can see that, just confirmation of what probably many of us knew already, which is that women are much more involved now than even men. While everyone's helping out more, everyone's doing more, women are certainly on the leading edge of unpaid domestic and care workload. We know that so many women have had to leave their jobs or leave, employment opportunities because of needing to support, families and children at home, those who are learning offline, et cetera. We are always paying attention to what's happening with women in informal sectors, and domestic workers have really supported many families to cope, and that's the reality. But many of them, many domestic workers have also lost their jobs. And so this is something that we recognize just needs to be consistently part of the conversation, brought to the table. And we need to be thinking about this as we're thinking about solutions to make sure that women are remaining in leadership positions in, whatever type of employment they can be present in. And this needs to be part of our conversation about social protection and safety nets. Now, related to what's happened, what's unfolded related to violence against women and this COVID-19 pandemic, for those of us who've been working on violence against women for so many years, many of us saw these unfortunate outcomes coming. We saw that this was going to really create a lot of difficulties, additional difficulties related to violence, and this could be really triggering the violence that was already there, right? We knew that even before COVID happened, that 243 million women were estimated to have been subject to physical and sexual violence by intimate partners in the previous 12 months related to past research. But we knew that that would increase because of the security, health fears, money worries that really just heightened these risks. And so we've done quite a few types of data collection. We recently did a big data analysis to look at what could we learn through social media, like help-seeking searches, Google searches, social media conversation, what were people talking about? And we found that, in fact, there was a very strong correlation between online help seeking and information seeking about violence when the lockdowns were sort of at their most severe. And so this has really given a big push to national leaders, heads of state, high level government officials, as well as all of the whole civil society community, which is really pushing for governments to step up, to invest, to make sure that violence against women is kept as a national priority in COVID response plans. And we have been noticing with disappointment that there's not really enough women in these national COVID response task forces and committees, which are making decisions about what gets prioritized and where money is spent. But that's something, of course, that we're calling attention to. And this has been such a noticeable issue of violence against women during COVID that the UN Secretary General has really issued a very high level push for leaders to step up and make sure that this violence against women doesn't get deprioritized, that police are not pushing women away when they go to seek help, which has been happening. Same thing with health workers and health institutions. So we want to make sure that the doors remain open for women, and that includes for shelters and other types of crisis services. And so just a quick word to say that, fortunately, we know that the evidence is growing and is there to guide really solid practice, both for prevention and response, to shift these social norms about how we see women. Again, back to what some of the opening remarks said, that we really have to rethink how women are being portrayed, how we are portraying women. Are we portraying them as victims, as vulnerable, or are we portraying them as leaders and solution finders, and women who are facing difficulties that are not, of their own doing? And so it's really critical that we are able to really transform that view of women and that view of women's potential, and really placing blame for violence where it belongs, which is with perpetrators of violence. And so we see the need as well to engage with media and communications, sectors really quite differently about how we're communicating about violence, and really shifting, especially the blame and the responsibility for violence where it belongs, which is with perpetrators of violence. Now, related to women's leadership in this region, you've already given some important statistics. We are quite conscious that in this region, there's only 3 female heads of state. In Asia Pacific region, all countries in the region have less than 30% of women holding ministerial positions, except for New Zealand, which is at 30.8%. Our latest research by UN Women and UN SCAP shows that women representation in our national parliaments is up, fortunately, from 13% in the year 2000 to around 20% in the year 2020. However, this is still lower than the global average of nearly 25%. And so, of course, we really want to be very intentional and very focused on seeing increases in those numbers and seeing women, occupy those spaces of power and decision making. Now in business and entrepreneurship, we're seeing that women occupy less than 25% of managerial positions in this region, while the global average is around 30%, which, for many of us is still not enough. However, many women are thriving as entrepreneurs across our region, innovating and creating opportunities, including in digital and financial inclusion, which we know are really strategic places where we want to see growth. Now, I wanted to share this slide, which I just pulled out of the a new resource we've produced. We do this Women in Politics map, where we map, the women's leadership in political positions around the world, and we do a big visual. Now, this is a little graph that's one part of that poster, and I thought this was really valuable to highlight here because it shows where we see more of the women ministers holding portfolios, what type of sectors. And so we can see that, as we all know, the women are represented, fairly well in areas such as social and cultural affairs, family, education. But there's limited numbers. There's far fewer women leading portfolios and leading ministries related to population, transport, media, finance, human rights, defense. And so these are areas where, of course, we want to take a really intentional sort of strategic approach to seeing growth there in women's representation and leadership. And so we're really interested in understanding how can we move much quicker. My executive director has said that women want to leapfrog. We want to really leap ahead. We're not really satisfied with these small increases. We want to really push ahead at a much faster pace to see women's representation grow in these particular sectors. I thank Vandana Rana for mentioning the Generation Equality Forum, which we recognize is a really massive movement happening right now to accelerate progress in a very different way, with women's voices, civil society, youth voices really at the leading edge here, alongside national governments, alongside private sector, media, exactly the folks that we know that we need to be talking to and expanding our sort of spheres of influence with. And so I think many of you know that we're having the Generation Equality Forums are happening at the end of this month in Mexico, and then in June in Paris. There's invitations for participation, and that's really sought after to have a strong civil society representation there, and I know we'll see that. But I thought to share with you some of the kind of key actions that have come from the action coalitions and what they're really focusing their sights on. And those things are, for example, radical steps to end violence against women and girls, looking at, really changing our systems, laws and policies, as well as services, and our ability to strategically prevent and change those social norms that we're all talking about. A global reset on care work and equal pay, putting women and girls at the heart of the new digital and green economies, halving the current global gender digital divide faced by girls and women, putting women and girls at the heart of, that's there twice, digital and green economies, empowering women and girls to make and act on their own decisions about their sexual and reproductive lives, and increasing resources for feminist, youth-led, and grassroots women's groups, including women's funds. And so there's a very strong call for that, and we've been doing a fair bit of research and really producing the data, which says that this is something that we cannot let go of. Now, before I finish, and this is my last slide, I wanted to just make a quick mention that we have we're very proud that we've been able to pull together evidence, and this is really evidence built through women's leadership and hard work about what works and what's promising to prevent violence against women. We're really looking at long-term change. And there's a couple areas that are circled here, which are related to the power of linking up women's economic empowerment, women's groups, women's strategizing together, women's networking and empowering women with specific actions for ending violence against women, as well as poverty reduction. So if you're interested in that, in what's happening and what's leading edge, please do take a look at that. And I wanted to just also mention before I wrap up that we've got a lot of social media channels where we are very busy amplifying the stories, the voices, the experiences of diverse women And we invite you to join us and to share your stories with us. So I will stop sharing and finish there. Look forward to the participating in the rest.
Thank you so much for that, Melisa. That was really a comprehensive overview, and I think you've really set the context for the region. The impact that COVID-19 has been truly astounding, and you can see it in the statistics of violence against women and just the impacts it's had on gender equality. I think many of the key points you've said will continue to reappear throughout these discussions, so thank you for that. So now we move on to our second speaker, Hser from Myanmar. She's been an incredible advocate for human rights from within Myanmar and for the Karen minority groups in particular. So with the ongoing conflict within Myanmar, it poses to be an increasingly challenging context. In the face of such adversity, how do you define the challenges women are facing in regards to accessing leadership positions? And what do you think will be the future for female leadership in Myanmar?
Firstly, thank you very much for the organizer, especially for the nuns, CEDAW committee members invited. So I'm really happy that I've been here for represent and Burma, Myanmar, and also share about the current situation of Burma and also women's leadership and feminism future. So let me share my PowerPoint on the screen. So firstly, I would like to introduce about Women's League of Burma a little bit. Women's League of Burma formed since 1999. So what we established for, we are aim of increases the participation of women in struggle for democracy and human rights, and then promoting women's participation in national peace and reconciliation process, and also women in peace, women in decision-making level, and also enhance the role of women of Burma at the national and international level. So as you may aware of Burma, so we have very long civil war. So it's already more than 17 years. So, and that also in current situation of the military coup, this time it was 3 times already. So since 62 and 88 and 2021. So we faced the military coup already 3 times. So this time is very worse than the other past 2 times. So especially today, I would like to highlight about women's leadership in protests of the military coup. So overall, the situation in Myanmar. So since 1st of February, Burma Army military seized power in an illegal coup in early morning hours, and a senior leader were arrested, like Daw Sasuti and president also, and with the other human rights defenders and the other political leaders, and also some of the media and some of the women's leaders. So they were arrested and also detained, and that also we have total today. I did not total of the number of the dead. We have the situation have been votes in coming today, yesterday and today. So we have heard that were yesterday. So there are more than 50 dead, and also to date there are more than 38 people dead. In that, within the women's leaders who are very actively and lead the protests. So these as women's groups, we also have many concerns of the women peace and security. So in nation, the follow accident demonstrator wins, women has been targeted by the Burman Myanmar military security force in violence of the UN Charter and the UN Convention on the elimination of the forms of the discrimination against women, and in contribution of the UN Security Council Resolution 3025 and Declaration of the Elimination of the Violence Against Women, and the basis principle on the use of force and violence by the law enforcement official. So this is the take that the day by day that we have been record that especially the 6th of February, what we have collected the information from our members, that's the most of the women who are involved in like civil disobedience movement, and also who are involved in the protests, they were arrested and they were harassed. So since they protect they are doing the protests. And that also there's so many city and areas that the military and the police target the women, and they have the list to try to arrest and then try to try to make them to shame, to be afraid not to involve in the protests and the threats. And they also threat not only the women, but also they threat their family, to force their family, and also they are also used kind of like touching their body, or so many things make the women to be afraid and to do not to be in protests. So these are day by day that we have record, especially women who are leads or who are involved in the protests, heavy face many kind of this security, and also their concern. And every day they have to move around, and they can live in their home, and they can sleep in their home. So they have to move around for their security and a heady place. So yesterday and today we have heard, and the news came out that the military they officially announced the martial law. They were used as a martial law, and they will how to say arrest everybody who are basically involved in the protests or support the CDM, or support any funding or support anything of these current protests. So according to these, the coup, we actually women are how to say they are mostly used to be like filling in the black. So we have been experienced in so many times. So if the conflict happens between ethnic armed groups and military, Burma military, so there all of men, they run away because they are afraid of the portary and the other like a forced labor. Then the women they became a chief, a village chief. Then the women have to be make a decision of the village security or everything. Later, so if the ceasefire become, then they reject the women's to be the village chief, and the men come back and take over the position. And then the other also we have seen right now, so that's a lot of women active in the protests and lead in protests. But in our experience in Burma, whatever they try for the like a transition period or peace process, they agree in paper, but they are not implementing actively. So these are the problems and the challenge that we still faces for the women being a decision-making level. In practically, most of the women they take it the role of the leadership in different level, and then they also have like a power of respected by the people and community. But in a decision-making level, we face exclusion. So these are the death of number, the percentage of the death since the military coup. So if we count within 2 days, so there were more than 100 people died, within the pregnant women, within the young women, and within the mothers, and like some of very vulnerable. So that's those of the women. So they are also after they die, they also have the difficulty of their family livelihood and the other needs. So that's nobody taking care of this, and then nobody consider on this kind of the consequences. And then the collective response within the women's group in Burma. For now, so we have cooperate with the 5 Women Network. So with it, so many women's groups. So we cooperate, and we did a collective action. So we have we went to the embassy, in front of embassy, and demand and I urge their support and call it some response on the current military coup. And also we have set our letter to the UN Security Council, and also special reporter on on Burma. And also we also request and ask it the women's like a prominent women who are basically can influence their state or their community in their areas. So in these years, we have strongly commended the military coup, and we have activity of the flight and our surround activity. So this is the surround revolution that we are start in these years, because we don't want only the military add the military coup, but also we want to add the patriarchy and the dominant and any stereotype or any stereotype of that women's face. So these are the idea and the organized this year happening in our country, and show up their women's have kind of the evidence that women are also be in the revolution of adding a military coup, and it uses our evidence of the surround to flights to win our to win our revolutions. Yeah. So before I'm going to the feminist future, so the one that we have it calling with it a women's group. So these are called from our women's network. Basically, we have it engaged and cooperate before the coup. And we are also trying for the feminist movement in Burma, and to engage with many different targets, and especially to advocate and put many stakeholders for the women's leadership to take role in decision making level. And that these times also we also cooperate for the international and regional advocacy to all of the international and regional community to consider of our situation right now. So we also demand announce the military. Even we don't call currently we don't call the military Burma military. We call the territory groups. Even they are not a military that protects the peoples. So they are against the people and attack the people. So that's why we announce that they are, and we recognize that they are a territory group right now. So the women's organization, all of the women's organization deeply concerned about the safety and the security needs of the women who are in CDM and also who are in leading roles, and their lives, and also the risks owing to the lack of protection and a prevention measurement from the harms. And the other key challenges include guarantee livelihood and employment, and also opportunity in case of the demise. So these are the current situation of a woman leadership in Burma. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Hser. Thank you for sharing your experiences and the impact that these violent actions are having on women in Myanmar. I think you've shown the resilience of women there who continue to fight against the violence and to have their voices heard. And I, like many of us, condemn that violence being exercised under the military rule. So I thank you for having such a strong voice against these injustices. So next, I welcome our third speaker, Losana Tuiraviravi, to speak. Losana is the current acting team leader of the Intergenerational Women's Leadership Program with Fiji, with the Fiji Women's Rights Movement. She has experience with facilitating and engaging young women in Fiji to build their advocacy skills and become emerging leaders. So my question for you, Losana, is from this experience, what do you believe is the biggest challenge facing youth leadership in the region? And where do you see feminist leadership heading within Fiji? Is Losana still here? She might have dropped out perhaps. Am I being heard?
I hear you.
Okay. Maybe we'll move to our next speaker then. We'll go on to Rosana, and if Losana comes back, we will go back to her. So Rosana, she has been working for over 20 years within women's rights movements. And as such, I'm sure you've seen many shifts and changes within women's access to leadership. As the Executive Director of Sisters in Islam, what do you see are the challenges being faced by Muslim women to access leadership positions? And what do you believe will be the future of feminist leadership within a Malaysian context? So over to you, Rosana.
Okay, thank you very much, Isha. You can hear me loud and clear, yes?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, thank you. I won't have any slides to show, but I will definitely be sharing the experiences that we've been having here in Malaysia. And the reality is that when it comes to the leadership positions within politics at the parliamentary level, at the state legislative level, it is still left wanting. And the reason for this is because political parties are still not prioritizing women's political participation as much as we would like to see. And this is regardless of, religion, ethnicity, any kind of affiliations on those boundaries. And so the challenge really is across the board for all women in Malaysia, but I will also be speaking in terms of, some very particular challenges that Muslim women face with regards to this. The major hurdles also that we're facing right now, I mean, the situation in Malaysia, we are actually in a state of emergency. The reason being that, the government has stated that a state of emergency needs to be declared in order to manage the COVID-19 situation a little bit more better, to better manage the COVID-19 situation. But we also have a government that actually came in through very in ways and means that undermined the decision that was made by the Malaysian citizens in the last elections in 2018, the general election, the 14th general elections. And what happened last year was that there was a political move to undermine, and so what we have right now is a government that came in through the back door. And so there's actually a resistance towards the government by most of the civil society and NGOs. However, because of the COVID-19 situation, it also places us in a very unique position in terms of how do we do this mobilizing and outreach against the current government within the state of emergency. The reality also is that majority of the public are still not willing to let go of political structures that rest with men who are in their twilight of their years. There's a lot of stake monetarily in terms of money, in terms of social capital, And, we are really left with, political structures of political parties without any ideas and values that can meet with the demands of our society in the 21st century. And there's also constant downplaying of youth's capacity to think and act when it comes to selecting leaders. So there has been a movement by young people to bring down the age to vote from 21 to 18, which was supported, had strong support 2 years ago and has in fact been gazetted, but how, the implementation is still, not there. And in fact, in recent times when, just last week, there was conversation about not going through with this. And so it is really very, very frustrating because the number of youth can definitely, hearing their voices, what they have to say, is really very important and critical because the challenges that they're going through right now is very, very unique. And the reality also is that political parties have a role not only in educating the youth, but to also hear what is it that they're going through, what needs are urgent for them, and it would be up to the political parties on what they can do to respond to the young and to make their politics relevant to what is needed on the ground. Now, coming back to women's political participation, I mean, the questions that we need to ask ourselves, I mean, in Malaysia, do we not have women with capabilities? And, the role model that, we're all looking to, especially in this period, is, of course, Jacinda Ardern. And I would like to add here, the unique situation with regards to Muslim women, with Malay Muslim women, is the fact that, capable women exist across the different fields in our society, but, raising them takes a village. However, the opportunities for women to actually come forward, and participate in politics really is a culture that needs to be cultivated right from the beginning, right from within the family, from their young. And this is where the challenge is for Muslim women, because their voices are not heard. Because culturally as well, it is common to still see, a form of segregation between men and women within the family, during family gatherings, where women, are expected to still go to the kitchen and not sit around amongst men, where, conversations about politics, will definitely take place. And so there's also still a reluctance. I mean, we had our first ever deputy prime minister in Malaysia, who was appointed in 2018 following the 14th general election, and that was already quite a big stride in terms of how the politics has been going on in the last 60 years. So this was a good thing. However, there is still that notion of yes, she can be in leadership positions, but she may not be within the key leadership positions. And women themselves, have a challenge as well in terms of, why is it that they're not taking this role, taking ownership, that the fact that they can lead a country, and why not take it up instead of, trying to make room for men to be able to still do that. So there's a lot of hurdles I think we need to overcome when it comes to social and cultural barriers. And I think really that starts within the home. And therefore, the narrative on women being equal, that women can be leaders, is something that needs to come out more. There needs to be more visibility, there needs to be more conversation, because in actual fact, when we look at the public life, that there definitely is a lot more women, within in employment, in managerial positions, whether in the public or private sector, there are more women. And why not then within political parties? So there's still a lot of mindset shift that needs to be changed. And secondly, we also still, are in a situation where political parties are not, making women central within their parties, because we still have women's wings. And especially, the most of the established political parties have this still. Undoubtedly, it's there in order to serve as a stepping stone for women to enter politics. But yet, there's still so much support. The support, it's great that, this stepping stone is there, but somehow in terms of women being part of the conversation within, decision making within political parties, it's still very at a very minimal. On top of that as well, there are also further segregation in terms of, youth, and then after that, women's youth wings. So these kinds of political structures, even though it's there to kind of like provide support, but I think for as long as and it's needed, because the women have come together, they talked about it, they talk about, the barriers they feel in terms of how they can engage within their own political parties as well. And so the support is needed, and all kinds of trainings, all kinds of mentoring that needs to go on. Yet, when it comes to policy making, what kind of discussions do they have when they talk about issues pertaining to women and children, violence against women, employment for women? All of this it has yet to be centralized within the political parties, for most of them anyway. And so, these women's wings, strengthen the kind of gender stereotypes that we've been talking about, because there's not enough discussions, so when it comes to talking about women's issues, it's still kept within those women's wings and not centralized at the parties. So this structure needs to be addressed. But what about the role of our democratic institutions, because they also have a role to play in terms of ensuring that, women are actually centralized. And so institutions such as, the parliament, the state legislation, state legislative assemblies, also must be strengthened to allow representatives to meaningfully contribute towards genuine policy making through either, committees or, allocations, and instead of, putting aside, all kinds of political barriers, for such discussions and for such empowerment of the representatives to be able to make concrete decisions for their constituency. And so where do we go from here? I mean, what I would like to share is actually, a lot of exciting things that are happening since last year. Since when the pandemic happened, our parliament did not meet up. It was a very frustrating moment because we consider this, it is essential for Parliament to still meet regardless of, being in lockdown and so on and so forth. And a group of youth, they call themselves the Parliament Digital. They had organized themselves to appoint, 222 young representatives from between the ages of 15 to 35. And they showed Malaysia how Parliament seatings can still be done during the time of the pandemic. And our parliament is still not meeting now. It's so frustrating the fact that the MPs are not taking note of the fact that there's so many things that can be done online, on digital, just like how we are doing now, and they're denying it. They're denying the voice of the youth, they're denying the voice of the public, and it's very frustrating. And I would also like to add in terms of I would also like to add one more thing, that there is a youth initiative called the 111 Initiative that aims to ensure that there is 50% female representation, at least in the lower house of the parliament. There's a couple of things that I need to share, but I think I have run out of time. There's still barriers, but I think with the young people, there is hope. And I'm very, very hopeful that, they will pave the way forward for more women to come on board in decision making, in politics, in Malaysia. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Rosana. That was a really great overall speech regarding the political situation in Malaysia And I think you highlighted the need for it to start in the home to be able to break down the continued impact of social stigma and stereotypes. And that is something that has only been made worse under COVID-19. So touching on that is really great. So thank you for that, and for mentioning the youth. The actions of youth, I think, within the region has really shown that there is a need for governments to listen to youth voices, as they will be the future to come up with the solutions to the problems. So yeah, thank you, Rosana. So we'll go back now to Losana, Tuiraviravi. I'll just go back and highlight the questions that I initially asked. Losana, are you there now? Yeah, awesome. So my questions for you were, from your own experiences, what do you believe is the biggest challenge facing youth leadership in the region, and where do you see feminist leadership heading within Fiji?
Thank you for this opportunity. So first of all, yes, as already being introduced, I'm Losana, and I'm a young Pacific Islander of Itoke descent from the island of Fiji. I work for the Fiji Women's Rights Movement, and our only office is situated in the country's capital, which is Suvechya. And I have been engaged in the women's movement since my participation of the FWRM Emerging Leaders Forum in 2008. Before I move on to talking about responding to the question, I'd like to just introduce the organization that I work for, because I feel that it sort of addresses and it sort of establishes the kind of work and engagement that we do. The Fiji Women's Rights Movement is a multi-ethnic and multicultural non-government organization committed to removing discrimination against women through institutional reforms and attitudinal changes by means of core programs as well as innovative approaches. The movement practices and promotes feminism, democracy, the rule of law, good governance, and human rights. And it strives to empower, unite, and provide leadership opportunities for women in Fiji, especially for emerging young leaders. FWRM has two core programs. They are the Gender and Transitional Justice Program and the Intergenerational Women's Leadership Program. So for today's presentation, and also just responding to the question, I will specifically be focusing on the Intergenerational Women's Leadership Program. First of all, the program has transitioned from a Young Women's Leadership Program to now known as the Intergenerational Women's Leadership Program, and which sees our work ranging from engaging with girls ages 10 to 12, even continue to engage with our girls graduates from the ages of 11 beyond. Also, we do engage with our young women through the Emerging Leaders Forum, which is from the ages 18 to 25, and also its alumni, which is 25 and beyond. We also have established two main forums, which is the Fiji Young Women's Forum, which looks at young women participating in the space from ages 18 to 35, and also the Fiji Women's Forum, which is 35 years and beyond. The IWLP program is targeted at developing and enhancing diverse women, young women and girls leadership and capacity to create positive change in their communities. And since 2003, FWRM has worked with young women and girls in Fiji aged 10 to 25 years and supported the development of similar programs in the Pacific. And this includes women's organizations such as the Young Christian Women's Association in the Solomon Islands, Coop Women for Peace in Papua New Guinea, and Tong's Women for Action. The program involves working closely with young women and girls in developing their leadership and advocacy skills at the national, regional, and international forums through capacity building workshops, design, production, and dissemination of information, educational and communication materials, and facilitating the inclusion of young Pacific women at policy-making forums. FWRM works with a diversity of young women, including young trans women, young women with disabilities, and also girls, to mobilize a critical mass of such marginalized communities to tackle women's issues at all levels of political and social activity. FWRM believes that in order to establish feminist leadership, we need to start early. So within our programs, we focus on our girls, and we find that young girls face double the discrimination for being very young and female. They are often left vulnerable with their issues and concerns being overlooked. Their right to voice their opinions are often hindered by various social barriers. That was some of the evidence that was provided by FWRM. Often they are unable to participate in decision-making both at home and their communities. So since 2007, FWRM has linked the celebration of International Women's Day to an event that targets girls. And this has led to the establishment of a girls program. Girls is an acronym. In long form, it's Grow, Inspire, Relate, Lead, and Succeed, a pioneering girls feminist program in the Pacific. So the girls program that we have running here in Fiji is one of the pioneering girls feminist program that has been established in the Pacific. And the girls program has increased its visibility of the girl child through innovative means to engage and introduce young girls between the ages of 10 to 12 years to human rights education, gender, feminism, and sports, and that are traditionally male dominated, such as soccer, touch rugby, and sevens rugby. Some of the girls' activity include sexual and reproductive health and rights sessions, writing and video editing skills workshops, day camps, theme weekend camps, and using art as a form of activism. Currently, the girls program is using theater arts and digital storytelling as a platform to provide a safe and healthy avenue to raise issues against gender stereotype, bullying, and sexism. We have now partnered with the Fiji Association of the Deaf, working with deaf girls and also girls from informal settlements. Some of our girls graduates have moved on to tertiary institutions and are still making waves of change. On the other hand, we also target young women, and this is through our Emerging Leaders Forum, which is a year-long training program for 18 to 25-year-old young women. This program began in 2003 under the Young Women's Leadership Program banner. And the training consists of workshops and retreats aimed at developing young women's ability to critically analyze issues and develop advocacy skills. Topics such as gender, feminism, human rights, trade, the economy, the environment, gender-based violence, sexual reproductive health and rights, and women's participation in decision-making all are discussed and analyzed using a feminist and human rights-based approach. To date, there have been 7 cohorts of the program and 96 young women graduates, and later on next week, Friday, we will welcome another 15 young women who will be graduating from our 7th cohort. From then, movement building continues beyond as alumni members for our young women. They have been building on from strength to strength, and some of the major key advocacy work that they are also doing in Fiji nationally, one of which is the street harassment advocacy that the young women have continually been addressing. So from that key area of work, we also have the forums. We have the Fiji Young Women's Forum and the Fiji Women's Forum. Just to provide a brief background as to why the forums were established, this was basically established as some of the experiences that Fiji has undergone politically, and I know some of the countries as well from Asia have already talked about the military coup, and Fiji has undergone 2 major military coups, and the last one being in 2006, where the government was then overtaken illegally by the military. And women's organizations started to mobilize to get everyone together and to get women to participate and get Fiji back to democratization. Hence the founding of both the Fiji Young Women's Forum and the Fiji Women's Forum. So the Fiji Women's Forum was formed back in 2012. And this was in order to bring together diverse women's groups towards the shared aim of increasing women's participation in leadership. So the Fiji Women's Forum is co-convened by 3 national women's organizations. They are the Songo Songo Wakamarama Ituke, which is an indigenous women's organization. And we have the Fiji Women's Rights Movement and FemLink Pacific, which is a community media-based organization that operates in Fiji and also in the Pacific. Specifically, the forum was founded to get the women's organizations together to increase women's participation in the Fiji national elections that was held in September 2014. So from the work that has been done towards the elections in 2014, the Fiji Women's Forum saw fit that women needed to increase their level of participation in leadership, and so it has continually operating till now. The forum believes that underrepresentation of women of all women or spheres is directly linked to many of the challenges that women face, including the struggles with conflict and democratization. The Fiji Women's Forum believes that the full representation of women at all levels is a fundamental ingredient in the prevention of the resurgence of violence and the long-term sustainability of peace and democracy. The co-conveners believe that peace, human security, and sustainable development are possible when women in all our diversities are equal partners within civil society and with governments and international organizations. Women's participation is key from the local to the national level and must be supported with an inclusive and creative information and communication system. By amplifying women's knowledge and voices, a shift from reaction to prevention is possible. A study conducted by the Fiji Women's Forum 2014, which is titled Public Perceptions of Women in Leadership, showed that in 2014, the Fiji Women's Forum, the survey found the following result to be very significant, and which I still see that it's still very much relevant to this context. The majority of people in Fiji feel that women are underrepresented in government and that changing this would be beneficial to the nation as a whole. People recognize that the qualifications and attributes of leadership are not unique to men, but are common in both men and women. And conservative viewpoints that favor male leadership are a small but significant minority in certain demographics. The strongest support for female leadership is found amongst women and young people. And also during the lockdown that we had also faced here in Fiji, and also when we were working from home, the Fiji Women's Forum also conducted a comparative analysis of the 2014 and 2018 general elections. So in 2014, a total of 42 women candidates contested the 2014 general elections, and many for the first time were contesting. And quite apart from 2018, a total of 56 women had contested, and that was an increase from 2014, out of which 10 women were elected into parliament. So those was just a few of the findings that we were able to extract from the comparative analysis. But at the moment, we have not released the comparative analysis due to the current situation where any papers or any research that is related to elections will have to undergo vetting from the Fijian Elections Office before it can be officially released. So the Fiji Women's Forum is hoping that before we conduct our Women in Politics training this year, we would be able to get that green light from the Fijian Elections Office to release the comparative analysis paper. However, on the other hand, we have the Fiji Young Women's Forum. And in this case, FWRM believes that any process without young women's full engagement in national or local elections is not a democratic process. Strengthening the capacity of young women in various political spaces is democracy in action and encourages young women to bring about transformative change in their communities. The Fiji Young Women's Forum basically also has the same setup as the Fiji Women's Forum. The Fiji Young Women's Forum is co-convened by the Emerging Leaders Forum alumni, Family Pacific, and House of Colors, which is an LGBTI group that is based in the northern part of the two major islands in Fiji. These groups have demonstrated great leadership and solidarity in young Fijian women by producing 4 progressive outcome statements in 4 forums in response to barriers to young women's meaningful participation and representation in Fiji's democratization process. The Fiji Young Women's Forum recognizes the unique young women-led space that fosters solidarity amongst a diversity of young women, which includes young lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex persons, young women with disabilities, young women of both religious and non-religious beliefs, aspiring young women politicians, young women sex workers, rural young women, and young women mental health consumers. Recognizing that young women have been marginalized from the 2012 to 2014 democratization process has motivated the forum to affirm that personal is political, consequently creating visibility in this process. The Young Women's Forum has provided a strategic platform to motivate young women voters in Fiji's general elections to raise awareness and the ongoing work to enhance active citizenship to hold national leaders accountable. In addition, the Fiji Young Women's Forum have been distributing its booklet titled My Guide to Voting, which was produced by young women for informed vote. And this was done in 2014 and in 2018, and hopefully this will be done as well before the 2022 general elections. So from Fiji, both the Fiji Young Women's Forum and the Fiji Women's Forum are both preparing to have their women in politics training and also conduct the various divisional national dialogues to start the process of promoting women's political participation. So from FWRM, it does play an integral part of creating influence and change in these spaces. And to create change, it requires an intergenerational approach, and that is basically what FWRM's work for in this core program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Losana. That sounds like a fantastic program, and thank you for highlighting all the work that you're doing and sharing that with us. You really shown the importance that grassroots institutions can play in instilling the skills and knowledge that all young women need to become the advocates and leaders within our societies. As we've heard from many of our speakers, it's young people who are looking to change the systems and institutions to have their voices heard at all levels. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. I'm sure many of us are interested to hear more about it. So we'll move on to our next speaker. So our next speaker will be Medha Sharma. She's the president of Visible Impact, a not-for-profit within Nepal. And Medha, you have some incredible experience in advocacy and working towards improving the health and well-being of women and girls in Nepal. From these experiences and with your own interest in public health, how have events like COVID-19 impacted women's access to leadership positions, and how do you see this shaping the future of feminist leadership? Sorry, Medha, I don't think we can hear you. Audio isn't quite coming through. I can't. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Isha, and hello and namaste, everyone. And I'm so glad to share this panel with you all. So Isha, let me begin responding to your questions by saying that, COVID-19 was an amplification of the systemic discrimination against women and girls that already existed. It was just a further exposure of our weak health system and our weak social system. Especially for young women, just like Losana just shared, young women have a double burden of being a woman and being young. Me, myself, as an activist for sexual and reproductive health and rights, have been disgraced so many times for, promoting sex, for talking about sex. I have personally been denied a very wonderful job just because I was unmarried. And despite, having done really good in the interviews and everything, the organization saw the need to, protect me as a woman by not sending me to field activities just because I was unmarried. However, talking about the bigger picture, in Nepal, we have been having a really good progress in women leadership. And we are one of the 3 countries that Melisa just mentioned with women in leadership role and women president. But at the ground, with COVID-induced lockdown, there were decline in the engagement opportunities, advocacy opportunities for young people like me were curbed. And I think the main concern is not only how much we have been hurt, how much we have been pushed back by this COVID, but how much will we be able to bounce back? Just like Melisa shared in her earlier presentation, I would like to share about one of my cousins who was working in a service sector before COVID, but she had to give up her job to fulfill the additional domestic duties. And now when the services have reopened, she was not called upon to rejoin the job. I mean, the men in her office were called upon first, and so many women like her still have to wait for a few more months when the services open fully. My cousin, she's worried that she might now not want to go back to the same job. Another of my friends, she had just married before lockdown, and she was talking about how they do not plan to have another baby for a few years. But then the lockdown immediately happened, and the society and her family burdened her to carry a child as soon as possible. They were saying lockdown is happening, maybe this is a very good time, maybe you should utilize this time to start being a mother and fulfill the job that has been assigned to you by the society. So when she had the baby, the family really accoladed her and praised her for keeping up with the job assigned by the society. Now she has really been into that, and she, has internalized that that's her job. And as a woman, it's more important that she fulfill domestic reproductive roles. And I am worried that she will now decide not to go back to her earlier job. So what I'm trying to say is that though we have been seeing a lot of progress with the sacrifice, with the mentorship of so many feminists, women and girls who had started to gain confidence and who had started to take up leadership roles have been pushed back, right? Well, with COVID-19, they are the first ones to lose the jobs, and probably they'll be the last one to, bounce back. I'm also thinking about so many girls who have been dropped out of school. In Nepal, one of the researchers has showed that as much as 50% of the girls might be affected, and so many of them might not want to go back. In this 1 year, so many of them have been pushed into early marriage. So it's about a whole generation of girls who were preparing themselves for leadership with education support. They are pushed back. Talk about trans women or women with disabilities who did not have accessibility to contraceptives or other sexual and reproductive health services during the time of COVID. Talk about young people, who otherwise would have picked up contraceptive devices while coming back home from schools and colleges, but now they are being questioned by the family, and so they have been denied these access to contraceptives, and so many women were forced to continue the pregnancy in lack of abortion services in the very early days of COVID. Talk about those women in healthcare sectors who were at the front line and who were not able to, who had difficult times managing their menstruation because PPE were very uncomfortable and they could not simply wear sanitary pads, and they were not allowed to change for 6 hours. So they had all these challenges of managing the menstruation. So, like other times of crisis, so we needed to have women leading the incident management committees and, having that gender lens on. But unfortunately in Nepal, and so many of the incident management committees at the ground level did not have women representatives. I would also like to share that, I did my postgraduate diploma in women's studies, and the very first day, the head of our faculty, she walked to the front of the classroom and said, girls, start to get frustrated, because once you have that gender lens on and you try to analyze and see how the gender has been socially constructed, and then you begin to understand the systemic discrimination, you will, try to see and have that gender lens on everything, and then you'll be having constant argument with your families and communities, and it's kind of frustrating that you now know what's causing these sort of discrimination, but then there is very little that you will be able to change. Every small gains are big wins, but it's still so frustrating when you are not able to change those roles. Having said that, I think I'm still hopeful. Though there are so much struggles in the field, COVID-19 did one thing, is that it proved that women in leadership are able to handle crisis better. So there are very good researches that show that countries that had women in leadership roles were able to manage COVID better. Also, a business that were led by women were able to bounce back and come to earning profit earlier than other that were led by male or other people after the COVID. Organizations like mine, Visible Impact, believe in mentoring women and girls to take leadership positions and advocating for their local and provincial government, for the policy environment and things that concern them. And so we have girls as young as 12 years who have been speaking out and demanding places at the policy tables. So these things really make me hopeful. Data shows that it might take us another 42 years to gain parity in the parliamentarian level and leadership, and another additional 15 years for parity in ministerial level positions. So we know that it might take us another century to see that parity at the ground level. But even if we have to keep, gearing up for another century or even more for that final push, I am ready. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that. I totally agree with you when you say COVID-19 is an amplification. It really was a magnifying glass over many problems that governments, I think, have tried to avoid. And your personal stories really are an example of the many stories that women in the region have had to face, and the impact that things like COVID has had on health and reproductive issues, showing just how much gender equality has really taken a step back because of lockdowns and the impacts overall from COVID. So thank you for bringing that to our attention and for sharing your stories and experiences. So our final speaker today is Jean Chong. So I'd like to warmly welcome Jean. She is currently the Executive Director for SEONI and the Chairperson for ASEAN SOGIE Caucus, and has been a long-time advocate for the LGBTIQ community. So Jean, what are some of the key challenges you're noticing which are creating barriers for women, and in particularly queer women, from accessing leadership positions? And what do you think needs to change in the future to enhance women in leadership roles?
Hi. First of all, I want to thank the organizers for including us in the consultation. But I want to firstly acknowledge that Asia Pacific is a huge region with a massive amount of diversity, and I can only speak from experience for Southeast Asia. When you kind of posed the question to me before this panel, I was thinking about how to answer this question, because I think I'm basically kind of speaking from a regional perspective. But for many queer women, I think a feminist, queer, and intersectional lens is needed. This idea about intersectionality, which we are all very familiar, has since many years ago. But since then, there are like different kinds of range approach to look at intersectionality. First, there's the deconstructivist approach, which we totally reject categories. There's the intra-categorical, which we focus on the differences within groups. And there's the inter-categorical, where we explore the experiences of groups in these intersections. So the inter and intra-categorical is especially important for queer women because it allows approaching the problems faced by us in the intersections between sexism, heterosexism, cis-sexism, and monosexism, as well as considering the way classism, racism, and so on that it affects the queer women's life. So the ASEAN LBQ network, which is convened by Sayuni, we did a research around COVID and how it escalates existing problems. I kind of shared the link in the chat box earlier on. If you scroll upwards, you'll be able to download the report. So a very fast key findings that using these frameworks, we look at what's happening to all of us is during COVID, how does it escalate, right? So the increased threats to livelihoods and food security, because many queer women are overrepresented in the informal sectors. And why is that? So because they're not able to get jobs, right? Because of how they present, who they are, or their sexual orientation. The second key finding that we had was the intensified risk of conflicts and domestic violence. We surveyed the region. We found that about 65 to 70% of queer women face domestic violence during COVID. I mean, they already faced it before COVID, but it escalates much further than the statistics that we already have. And compounding that is the inequalities in healthcare access, the quality of healthcare, and the affordability. So there's this a lot of research about how does humanitarian aid reach communities, but very often queer women are in the last of the line because village chiefs and so on discriminate against them. And for trans women, they are able to access HRT hormone replacement therapy is greatly reduced because it's not seen as the most urgent thing. And also queer women with HIV status, that the intersections of that is that being able to access these medications means they have to come out first as HIV positive infected, or they have come out as queer women. So all these issues compounded their problems during COVID and even now. So the fourth key finding was the deepening social isolation and mental health concerns. We've surveyed many of them from different countries, and again, close to 70% talk about mental health concerns. I think the assumption is that everybody have mental health problems, but the issue with a lot of queer women is that as women, we don't have the access of the freedom of mobility. But as queer women, how does our community control and punish us for being different from what conformity, what is expected of what a woman should be like and who she is? So the fifth one is around stigmatization, discrimination, and hate speech. In some communities that we've surveyed, there are people or religious leaders that blame COVID because of LGBT persons. Because of you, therefore, there was COVID. Because you anger the gods, that's why there was COVID. Because of people like you, the sins of our community. So that further escalate violence against them, or all kinds of punishment against who they are. I think the sixth key findings is around infringements of civil and political rights. I think that what COVID has done is there's a kind of control that the government is asserting in the name of COVID. So there's a tracking of infringement of individual rights, and also the region. There's an economics democracy index last month, and they have polled the entire Southeast Asia as regressing. Not one country is considered moving ahead, and many LGBT activists or LBQ women are in the front lines of a lot of these protests, whether in Indonesia, in Thailand, or in Myanmar. We've received news from our networks that some of the LGBT activists are in the front line was killed, was shot down in the Myanmar protests as well. So a lot of the LBQ activists, it's not just about their sexual orientation or LGBT rights, but the right of their existence in the country, and they care for the human rights of the country. So there are a lot of different constraints of how queer women face. But I really want to highlight how resource-starved we are. In a research done by the Global Philanthropy Project, for LGBT funding globally, LBQ women only get 8% of all funding focused outside of USA from 2017 and 2018. And then in human rights funding globally, queer women gets nothing, 0, because the percentage is so low. In another research, very recent by Austria and Mama Cash, was that the total external global funding for queer women's groups in Asia Pacific was $1,170 annually. That is $20 lower than Central Asia. So we are right at the bottom of how much resources and support that we're getting. And then our own research by the ASEAN SOGIE Caucus was 1/3 of queer women's groups in Southeast Asia gets no funding. They operate without funding at all. Another 20% operate within $1,000 and $2,000, and 78% of queer women's groups in Southeast Asia are not registered. So there are a lot of challenges for them to access funding, because a lot of times, how do you get it when you're not registered, right? But I think what compounded the problem further was also the lack of acceptance by women's groups in my region. I've sat in many meetings when we ask women groups to include us in their programs. But the answer that I often get over 10 years in advocating for this space is that, what do I lose to include you? Or they will call us others, not accepting of that we are part of the women's movement, we are women as well. So there's a lot of struggle around this, but of course, it's not all women's groups are like that. The women's groups are really supportive, but the overwhelming experience is that way. Even within UN agencies or large regional women's groups, there's always been a struggle to include queer women in the official program of the organization. And I think one thing that I really want to highlight is that we poll all the queer women's groups in Southeast Asia. The number one issues that they all face, they all talk about facing, the number one issue they're concerned about is gender-based violence. That is the number one challenge that they face in every single country. It's almost like they didn't plan it, but they all said the same thing. So what are some of the change that we're looking for? I think that we're looking for more collaborations with women's groups and for real inclusion in the women's movement. We're looking for more women role models, perhaps in the South-South learning programs, inter-country or inter-regional meetings. I think that inclusion of queer women is especially important so that our voices can be heard. And then also lastly, which I kind of skipped through just now, was to also address the patriarchy within the LGBT movement. I think that a lot of times LGBT groups are led by men, and the unique or different challenges faced by the other identity groups are not seen or not programmed around it. So there's always the the notion that in Southeast Asia that gay men suffer the most, but in reality, from research, you can see that we all suffer, but sometimes we suffer differently. So I think that distinction and nuances needs to be said. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, and we're very happy to have you here sharing your experiences. Thank you for highlighting the extra challenges that queer women face and just how COVID has really intensified it. Sort of regardless of how economically progressive countries are within the Asia Pacific, we still need to be more open and accepting to allow queer women to really thrive and gain access to these roles and have your voices heard. So that's really the end of the main part of the panel discussion. I think we still have some time. So I know Melisa has left, but with our other speakers, I have one more quick question to ask everyone. Just a 1-minute response is fine for it. Just can you reflect on one thing you're hopeful about for the future of feminist leadership? I think we can start with Noor Hser, and we can run through the same order of speakers from there.
Yeah, thank you very much for the chance again. So we have heard from many different experience of our Asia Pacific countries. So the other side, we face the challenge, but the other side, we see the powerful of women's movement stuff or the feminine movement. So this the big powerful that I have seen to date. So what I hope for the feminist future. So if we women, try to reach something, nobody will give our place. So this is the strength or the experience from the other women has been tried many way, and especially to reject all patriarchy and to reject all any dominance and to reject all any stereotype. This is really important that we are trying to build up the feminist movement, and also the engagement and cooperation or communication is very important in this moment. Either we can meet face to face, how we can gather it and engage more in different level in regional and Asia Pacific or international level to be more powerful of a women's feminist movements. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We'll go to Losana now.
Hi again. So from me, it's just basically 3 major points, and just building up from the previous speaker. One is being innovative. Women by nature are innovators, and I believe that any woman is a great leader and can adapt to any changing context. All we need is to equip and support her. Second, just being relevant, understanding the multi-layers of challenges that a woman face in order to get into leadership positions. So it's just not being there, but knowing that every girl and women are counting on you. And the third one, because of the experience that I have in the different types of groups that I engage with, I do hope that in my lifetime of this experience of work that I'm doing, that I'm able to say, yes, that was the influence I made with any of the girl child or women or young women that have undergone our program. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So Rosana, your response, please.
Really, I have nothing more to add aside from what I've said before, that, it's the young people who I find hope in, because they have the imagination, they have the imagination, innovation. They also have the courage. They also know better on how to claim the platforms. There are still cultural, social barriers that we need to overcome. But even then, I think by them engaging in more narrative making, I think they'll definitely be able to lead the way. So yeah, my hope is in the young people. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So I think we're up to Medha. Medha Sharma, I think it's your turn. Okay, I'll pass it on to Jean instead.
Okay, hi. I think there's a lot of emphasis around young people. So recently we're doing a project called Our Mothers Before Us, because there's so much wisdom, experience that could be passed down and shared and still be part of the movement. Yeah. So the younger and older generation.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Medha, are you there? I think in that case, we will wrap up here. That brings us to the end of this panel discussion, and I thank all of our speakers for sharing your stories, experiences, insights, and views, and for giving us so many different diverse answers. It's been a real privilege for me to be able to moderate this discussion and hear from each and every one of you. So now I believe there'll be a short clip, and then Carol Shaw, our co-chair of Asia Pacific NGO CSW, will provide the summary of the consultation day. So that's all from me, and thank you again, everyone.
That was an amazing set of discussions. We've been looking at the context of increased racism, decolonization, pushback on human rights, increased securitization, conflict and political stress. Within that, the lack of funding and the lack of voice that's occurred. Really, that's pretty a typical day in the context of COVID. But within that, there's been some very strong messages coming through: the role of democracy and the need to really strengthen state legislative action, get more women into parliament, into state parliament, into committees, bringing more women through. And we've seen some excellent examples through this, through the Fiji Women's Rights, through Women's League of Burma, the challenges and the ways that grassroots organizations have been able to fill gaps where other organizations haven't. The need for these forums, which fall within a feminist human rights approach, to critically analyze and to speak the truth to power, to be able to bring those voices into a main arena, especially with the structural challenges that we're seeing. The need for collective action is highlighted by Myanmar, and by Bridget was talking about that, and the need for more statistics. Now, the statistics that are being gathered, we're not getting truth. There's a lot of rapid assessment happening, and it's not coming through quick enough for everyone. The need to be able to use human rights international agreements. We talked about looking at UNHCR and CEDAW, very strong tools and hooks to be able to argue our position from, especially in the pushback on civil and political rights that we're hearing. This increased securitization is coming through in all of the discussions, the impact that that is having through lockdown on sexual and reproductive health, on women's care in the economy, the impact that COVID has had on the economy and on I've just lost my chain of thought, sorry. The impact on the economy and the way that we need to be changing the way that we're working. So where in Nepal, they were saying that more women have come through this, through their businesses, have come through better. In other cases, we're hearing a lot more about the increase of the feminization of poverty due to the increased casualization of labor in the workforce. And of course, it's women and women outside, and that broad diversity of women that sit within that. The impact of lack of travel, on tourism industries, on markets, on market gardens, on those areas. We're not seeing the true picture of what's happening there yet, but that's really been there. And I think the strong message was in this issue, the political will is really missing in the implementation of bringing women into the spaces where women need to be. It's not that there's a gap. There may be at some points a need for more sharing and more collective action, such as the Emerging Leaders Forum, that bring young women into these discussions. But I think the need to contextualize the narrative within the political parties and to change that narrative of women leaders is really key at this point. And so this was really strongly coming through. The civil and political, the spaces to be able to participate in politics are being closed off, and that's really causing major impacts. So it's just, there's been so much information come through that if I tried to pull up every single point, I think it would be really a major challenge. But in order to try to summarize with the issues of there's a real need to push to address these issues at the regional level and to really start to strengthen the role of democratic institutions within the context of not only of COVID, but within the context of increased conflict political pushdown. And I think with the key areas of increased securitization on civilians and on, women who have been, who are really having rights stripped away and are being more challenged. If we look at how this is playing out in Myanmar with face recognition technology, the increase in technology as a use has been really useful here in being able to communicate and to connect. But in many cases, people, as we've seen throughout this presentation, the breakdown is not there. The consistency of that information technology is not there. So how do we mobilize, I think, are key points that we take away from this. And that is over to Danica to say the vote of thanks.
Thank you for that, Ms. Carol. So the Asia Pacific NGO CSW committee, composed of Suvechya Rana, Carol Shaw, youth representatives Isha Tembe from Australia, Suvechya Rana from Nepal, Humaira Sharifi from Afghanistan, Losana, Tuiraviravi from Fiji, Doris Tulifa from Samoa, and myself from the Philippines extend our deepest gratitude first to our brilliant speakers, to Ms. Melisa Alvarado from UN Women, who discussed what UN Women calls the shadow pandemic and VOWC and COVID-19, women's leadership in the Asia Pacific featuring the Women in Politics map and the respect framework of UN Women. Now Hser from Women's League of Burma, who presented the gendered overview of the situation on Myanmar. Rosana Isha from Sisters in Islam, who discussed the hurdles Muslim women face on political participation and the need for change to start at home, and the initiative of the youth to pave the way for more women to participate in politics. Losana Tuiraviravi from Fiji Women's Rights Movement, who shared the many capacity building trainings and mobilization efforts of various women's organizations to strengthen women's leadership and political participation. From Medha Sharma from Visible Impact, who maintained that COVID-19 is an amplification of existing inequalities and discrimination that young women face, especially in the context of SRHR and political participation. Finally, Chong from ASEAN SOGIE Caucus, who discussed various inequalities queer women, more so than heterosexual women, face in the Southeast Asian region, especially amidst the pandemic. We'd also like to thank everyone who joined us here today, all 62 of you who stayed with us up to the very end. We hope this timely event on women's leadership and the future of feminist leadership in the Asia Pacific brings us to action and meaningful participation. May more women take up space in places of decision making. And if those spaces do not exist, may we work towards creating them. As Ms. Bandana mentioned in the beginning of the session, we can do it, we will do it, we must do it. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a very exciting panel. And thanks to all who contributed, who spoke, who moderated, particularly our youth team, Suvechya, Isha, Danica, Humaira. So you see, we are trying our best to keep the youth at the hem. And this is truly an intergenerational dialogue. So thank you to everyone. I'm just making use of the time. I think we are still.
We would also like,
Carol, yes.
No, we're right on time. I would like to invite any of you in the audience to contact us if you're interested in being part of the Asia Pacific NGO CSW, especially the youth team, which we're trying to grow and strengthen the voices of across the region. So thank you for attending, and we look forward to continuing the dialogue and the conversation with you.